Hey, it's Nicole.
And Marina.
And we're popping in to say that we're launching a product. The Capsule Collab is our curated box with themed collections. Check us out at thecapsulecollab.com and on Instagram at thecapsulecollab. Welcome back to the Gen 20 podcast. I'm Nicole.
And I'm Marina.
And today we're chatting about how friendships changed over the course of your 20s.
First, I want to talk about how hard it has sometimes been to make friends in my 20s. Like in my early 20s, I had college friends. And then when I moved, graduated and moved, I moved to New York City where I had a few friends who also moved, and I had my brothers. But I would say I made some work friends pretty quickly because the company I worked for was all the same. Basically, we were all the same age. It was basically a fraternity. But when I moved to California, I was in Santa Barbara, which is a weird town. It's a great place, but it's kind of got a weird age grouping. And there's a lot of people in their 30s, 40s, 50s, and they're already established. So when I moved here in my mid 20s, I had so much trouble making friends because I couldn't meet anyone at my own age. Most of the people I worked with were in their 50s. And so it's very interesting how making friendships changes from when you're a kid and you just become friends with your the neighborhood kids or people in your class, to being an adult. And if you move to a new city, having to start from scratch. What do you think, Nicole? Was it easy to make friends for you?
I don't want to say it was hard to make friends, but I definitely think there's a difference in how I made friends in my early 20s versus my later 20s. And I think a lot of that definitely has to do with college, kind of like how you're touching on. A lot of the friendships I have now even have come from my college years. And I mean, that basically means we've been friends for a decade, which I don't want to talk about that. But it's you kind of become friends with people you're taking classes with or, working with in college or living with and things like that. Whereas as you get older, a lot of us are kind of moving around and shuffling place to place. I moved to Seattle in my early 20s and I knew a couple of people here from college. And I mean, a few years after we moved here, they moved away. And I started to kind of branch out and make other friends. But most of those friends weren't even people that I met in person. They were people that I met online, through Twitter or Instagram and stuff like that. Even some people we've had on the podcast, like Tori, she DM'd me on Instagram and was like, hey, do you want to get coffee? And I was like, yeah, for sure. Let's do it. And then also Erin, who's also been on the podcast, we both replied to the same thread on Twitter. And I just looked at her Twitter profile and I was like, I like your vibe. And then so I just was like, hey, do you want to get coffee? Which was very brave and bold of me because I think that was the first person I ever did that to. And she was like, yeah, but we were instantly friends. It was just an instant vibe. And I feel like as you get older, you have to be a little more proactive about your friendships.
I love that. Yeah. Well, and I think there's something about internet friends that's different than when you make a friend location based, because you and I became friends on the internet and we were friends online only for 4 years before we met, 3 years. And then I flew and stayed with you and your husband in your studio apartment the first time I met you. I was just I remember falling asleep on your couch a couple feet away from your bed being like, good night.
Yeah,
Thanks for
that was so
hosting me.
cute.
It was so fun. But I think because of the circumstance of how you're meeting when you meet on the internet, the connection's different versus if you bump into someone, if you live in a smaller town and you bump into someone regularly, you might end up just starting to hang out, but you might not have the same connection. It is interesting, but I definitely have noticed, because I've moved a bunch, I felt like I didn't want to give up my friends I'd had for so long from childhood and college, and I worked really hard to maintain those friendships. So it felt like I had just only virtual friends, and it was hard to figure out how to make new in-person friends, especially when there were not a ton of young people nearby. But
Yeah.
friendships, I would say even our friendship has changed in how long? 23. We met in 2013, so we've been friends for 7 years, and I would say our friendship
Mhm.
has changed to 10 just in
Yeah,
the even in the last 2 years.
yeah, it's definitely, I think, way deeper and more connected now, but I feel like that also happened, like, over time, like, the first time you visited, it was for, like, 2 days,
Hmm.
and then we were both like, "Okay, cool, like, we can spend some
Like,
more time together."
right, like
So then
we still like each other.
yeah, so then I think I went to visit you after that,
Hmm.
and I wanna say that was, like, I stayed for 3 days maybe?
3 or 4.
I don't know, the trips got, like, progressively longer, which is, like,
I
I
know,
feel like
and
it just took time to do that, you know?
yeah, now I'm like, so if I stay with 2 weeks, is that cool? And you're like, stay forever.
Yeah, I'm like, just be like, "Hey, I'm coming up, it's cool," and, like, I'll be like, "Yeah, girl, I got your air mattress.
Yeah.
It's all
And I
good."
think like as we went through life together too, like when you were expecting baby and I came up and or like after you had him and I came up and like I don't know, it deepened our friendship.
Yeah.
And I think just like going through kind of like the bigger life things that you go through when you hit your mid and later 20s helps deepen friendships because you also, I don't know, we're not young anymore like we used to be. We get tired. I don't have the same emotional capacity to maintain friendships that aren't like helping me grow into the best version of myself. And so I think that changes a lot when you get older. You start realizing like what really matters in a friendship.
Mhm.
Because I know like I've talked about this before. Like I've had friendship breakups where it just realized like this isn't a good friendship for either of us. But I wouldn't have been like confident in myself to say at 22 like, hey, I don't want to be your friend anymore.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, like, as I get older, it's more like it's like a no hard feelings kinda thing, it's just like, our vibes aren't the same, we're, like, not in the same place, we don't have, like, similar values or thoughts or goals or whatever, and, like, that's fine, like, it's totally
Yeah.
fine for us to be different people, and it's like, you just kinda, like, move on, and I think it kinda goes along with, like, toxic relationships a little bit and, like, identifying those in your life, and just, like, noticing what friendships you have that you don't feel like you're contributing them to them well, or, like, they're not balanced, or like, I feel like I had this friend. I mean, we're still friends now, I feel like our friendship has changed a lot, but I always felt like I was gonna say something that would make her angry, and that, like, I mean, I was, like, 19, 20, 21, and I was just like, I don't know how she's gonna react to everything, but then I sort of, like, stopped caring, and I feel
Hmm.
like she became, like, slightly less high strung, and now we have, like, a very healthy friendship, but it's kind of like we kind of grew together, I feel.
Yeah, wow. I relate to that a lot. I definitely have been on the side of like walking on eggshells because I don't want to say the wrong thing or do the wrong thing.
Mhm.
And most of those friendships, I would say like eventually we just drifted apart because I was too afraid to like be my authentic self because I was too afraid to like say something wrong. And so
Mhm.
it was never a true friendship because
Mhm.
I couldn't be myself. But it is interesting how like connection can fade or strengthen. Like we had Angela on the podcast. She's a dear friend of mine from high school who we were really close in high school and kind of drifted apart a little bit in college because we went to different schools and then, you know, just time passed and I moved across the country and she reached out to me after the pandemic started just because she reached out because of the podcast and we started catching up and I was just like, "Oh my gosh, how could I have ever let this friendship fade?" And we've
Mhm.
reconnected and it was all circumstantial distance that we stopped kind of talking every day, but
Mhm.
I've always considered a friend and now we're like actively in communication and it's great. But I
Mhm.
think that's something that changes as you go through your 20s is the kind of way you communicate with your friends because like you and I, Nicole, we talk every day pretty much,
Mhm.
either texting or FaceTime. But I have other friends who I feel equally close to that I talk to like once a week or once every couple of weeks because of
Mhm.
like distance in life. And so when I was younger, I definitely felt like if we didn't constantly talk and be up to date on everything, that our friendships wouldn't stay strong.
Yeah, I think that's a good point too, because like even after I moved to the West Coast from the East Coast, like my friends would come visit me and they'd stay for 5 days a week, whatever, like however long they felt they wanted to. And I feel like we always had such a good time, like on those trips and things, and like that we weren't talking like constantly in between, but like the time we spent together was like very happily concentrated. And
Hmm.
I feel like as you get older, you don't need those like touch points like every single day with like every person in your life. Like you can still have very strong, solid friendships where you talk like once every couple of months and like, keep each other up to date on what's going on and things like that. And it's just like that definitely is a big change from like your early 20s where I feel like you constantly feel like you have to be in communication. And I mean, I think as we get older, I don't know if it's really just like a generational thing or the fact that like we kind of grew up like at the beginning of like online connection where it was
Hmm.
like, MySpace was what we had. And like it's just like a
Uh,
little it's like a little different, I feel, because now it's like I don't feel bad about like putting my phone on silent and like not touching it all night. Like I don't feel like I need to be checking my phone constantly. And like I definitely think we get into these habits where we're like opening the same social media apps every like 5 seconds. But like I don't think that's because we're like, oh, we need to be connected and see what's going on and things like that. We're afraid we're gonna be missing out on like what people are posting. I think it's just like a bad habit that we've developed, if
hmm.
that makes sense. So yeah, I feel like in your early 20s you have this like need to constantly be like, what is everyone doing? Like I have to talk to my friends constantly. But as I get older, I'm not like, oh my god, are they mad at me because they didn't text me today? Like I
Yeah.
don't have that feeling anymore.
Yeah. And that was a huge shift when I finally realized, like, oh, we can go days or months or weeks without talking and like no one's in a fight. That's like definitely a maturation thing. But I will say that with feeling connected to your friends, social media can be kind of tricky because, like with Angela, I didn't realize that we weren't talking because we're friends on social media and we engage on each other's social media. And so when we on our first like Skype call that we were catching up, I know all the things about her life, but I found out it through a third party social media app, and it was really weird to be like, "Oh, wait, we haven't talked. Like what else is going on?" And I think the pandemic has allowed for certain people to reconnect because we're all kind of, bored in our house, stuck seeing what people are up to.
Mhm.
And so it's kind of, on one hand, it's kind of a gift of this time where we can reconnect, but we have to be careful that you don't only keep your connection through Facebook or Instagram,
Mhm.
because then, I always think that relationships of any kind, whether they're like familial, romantic, friendship, platonic, whatever, I think you should work hard at any relationship, but these relationships shouldn't be hard. So you
Mhm.
have to put in the work to stay connected or to be a good friend, but it shouldn't be like painful to you.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, keeping in touch like it definitely takes an effort from both sides, like both people in the relationship.
yeah, and I used to be really upset when I'd be the one putting in all the effort, and then I finally was just realizing, hey, I don't have to work so hard. I can let them, it's the Hitch, like they come, you go 90, they come 10 from the Hitch movie.
Mhm.
It's like, well, I'll go 50, and if they can meet me where they're able to meet me, but I don't have to overextend myself, and it's okay. And I think realizing that and having like more understanding and ownership of how you friend can give you a lot of grace that you can then give to yourself,
Mhm.
because friendships are two-way streets.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it can be really unbalanced if you're feeling like you are constantly putting in all the effort and like this person is like never connecting with you, and it's just sort of like, well, I mean, do you even want to be my friend? Like, like why am I giving so much but getting so little
Hmm.
in return?
Yeah, and I think everyone friends differently, and we have to let them friend the way they can, but you also have to figure out like what it means to be supported by your friends. Like what do you need, and like how what your friends need. So like I had a friend who needed way more than I could give, and it turned me into a bad friend because I just started like fearing and avoiding her because they're just like, I can't expend any more emotions. I can't be the supportive friend you need. And I had to put boundaries in to
Yeah.
make it a safer space for me.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that thing about emotions, like just the thing that you just said,
Mm.
because I was thinking earlier about a lot of times, like a lot of things have like an invisible emotional weight that we carry. And I think that that's like something we don't think about enough, like whether it's in friendships or like other parts of life. But some like relationships can be very emotionally exhausting. And at some point, we have to decide whether it's worth it, and, like, I mean, honestly, it's probably not worth it, like, 99.9% of the time, to carry that, like, emotional burden, really, of,
Yeah.
like, what some of these relationships can put on you, and putting those boundaries into place, I think, is, like, something very underspoken about, but very necessary.
Yeah. And I think with learning to put boundaries, like, if you listen to the podcast, we're obsessed with boundaries, rightfully so. But learning to put boundaries on friendships, I think helps you realize that like who is meant to be staying in your life, and then helps you realize that not everyone you meet in life is meant to stay in your life long term. I remember my mom told me this when I was in high school because I had a friend who didn't who like clearly didn't want to be friends with me anymore, and I could not accept it. And she was just like, Marina, like you're going to have friends come and go, and when someone leaves your life, that just means that it's giving space for the next person who's meant to come in. Because if you think about it, we always learn new things with new relationships, with new friendships, different people. And so I think some relationships have natural courses that run and you get so much out of it, but it's okay that they end.
Mhm.
And there are certain friends I know I will be friends with for the rest of my breathing days. And then I have other friends who I really adore and I hope we're going to stay friends for a long time, but I can see that like distance and circumstance may lessen our connection, and that's okay too.
Mhm. Yeah, I think yeah, I mean, time and, other responsibilities can pull you apart and things like that, but, I mean, kind of like we were saying earlier, that doesn't mean that, like, you're not necessarily not friends anymore,
Hmm.
I think it's just important to connect with and be there for people, like, not just in their high times, but in their low times as well, and I
Definitely.
think that's one thing that also helps to define a friendship. 'Cause, like
Definitely.
yeah, like, I know with you, some days I'm like, "I'm lonely." And you just call me, and, like, it's so helpful to me
I
to, like,
mean,
feel like you're
yeah.
there?
Today I texted you, I'm lonely, and you said, Hey, I'm driving. Do you want me to call? And I was like, No, no, call me when we record. And it was great because I think it can be hard to admit the low times to friends, even if you're lifelong friends, because, we're taught that, society kind of tells us that like hard emotions are burdensome and you should just be happy and present a happy front, which is not true. And we're allowed to be sad. And the best friendships are the ones that let you be exactly who you are at that point in time.
Mhm.
And I think, life circumstances can change friendships. Like when you get married, I imagine, I have not yet been married, but I imagine, you're going from being single to having a life partner who you're spending all your time with, that your availability shifts. Like if you live alone or with a roommate, you can meet up anytime. But if you are living with a partner, a little bit less flexibility in your schedule. And I would say I've had like at this point, most of my friends are married and our friendships have all changed, but in for the better because they're happy. I'm
Mhm.
happy. I'm lucky to be friends with their partners as well. But those friendships have definitely changed.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's, like, natural and normal as well too because, like, I mean, kinda like you were saying, like, your schedule kinda becomes, like, a little more limited, but I think also kind of like how we kinda say to, like, respect our own routines and boundaries, I think once you're married, like, there's sort of, like, this routine and boundary that you have, and it's very, like, calming for me to, like, follow our same routine every night,
Hmm.
and it can take a lot of energy that I sometimes don't have to, like, break that routine.
Yeah.
So, that's just, like, another thing I feel like to consider.
And that definitely has come with age too, because I remember, I mean, I've never been a social butterfly in that I love to spend time by myself at home alone. But when I was in my early 20s, I was much more willing to like break the routine, meet up with friends after work or be more spontaneous. And now I'm just like, well, it is 7 p.m. I am already in my pajamas. I don't want to have to get re-ready. Like,
Yeah.
so
Can we schedule this for next month?
yeah,
Maybe,
can this be on a
perhaps.
Saturday during the daytime? But,
Yeah.
or like when people start having families, obviously their time changes. You're like, our friendship has changed since you had a baby for the better. I love your son and
Oh,
will steal him from you. No, I won't. Just wish of it. But you can't just drop everything and call me because I'm bored because you are feeding your son and things like that. And that's okay. Like that's a great evolution of friendship is that we're all growing together and I get to watch you become the most amazing mother and I love it.
thank you.
Yeah,
Yeah, it's definitely like priorities change over time, and like, whether you're married or not, or have kids or not, like your schedule and your needs are changing. And I think it's just important to respect how friendships can kind of come together in new ways as you grow.
absolutely.
So, to our listeners, if you have a friend that you've been thinking of reaching out to and you just haven't for one reason or another, we kind of encourage you just to reach out to that person today or tomorrow and just say, hey, thinking of you, or, anything like that, or just remember when, just so you know that you're still there for them, even though time has passed.
Absolutely. And we would love to hear from you. So shoot us an email or DM us on Instagram. And this has been another episode of the Gen 20 podcast. We hope you enjoyed it and thanks for listening. Please leave us a rating and review, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.